Alrighty, party peoples of the interwebs, last week it was Kyle Rittenhouse, and this week it seems to be Joe Rogan. Now, I'm in the parking lot of Valuetainment, getting ready to do another episode of The Unusual Suspects with Vinny Oshana and the gang, and I'm taking 10 minutes before I go in to do this car vlog talkie thing, because last week, Kyle Rittenhouse came out and said, I'm writing, I was going to say Ayn Rand, Ron Paul, on my mail-in ballot because Ron Paul is good on the Second Amendment. I've got a problem with Trump, and that's my line in the sand. Curiously, and I kick myself for not really having picked up on it at the time, Rittenhouse didn't post the video himself. Somebody else posted this video of Rittenhouse on their account, which actually raises some questions. But within 12 hours of having that video posted of Rittenhouse saying, I'm writing in Ron Paul, the Libertarian candidate, because he's good on the Second Amendment, well, there was a mild backlash of what some might refer to as the MAGA Republicans, and I'm using that in the not derogatory word. I'm using it sarcastically, ironically, because I don't believe that that term really should exist. But there were some very vocal supporters, social media accounts, who went ballistic on Kyle Rittenhouse. Traitor, yada, yada, yada. And within 12 hours, Kyle Rittenhouse came back and said, I've received a call from the Trump campaign. I have been assured that Trump is going to be good on the Second Amendment, and I'm back to supporting Trump. And then it would seem that some people might have learned the wrong lessons from the treatment that they gave to Kyle Rittenhouse last week when he expressed his own sincerely held political belief, which you can't fault him for, saying I'm going to support and vote in Ron Paul, especially in the District of Texas. I mean, it's not like saying I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris or I now support child genital mutilation as gender-affirming care. There are certain things that are lines in the sand and others that are reasonable differentiating differences of opinion. Rogan, in his episode, comes out and says RFK is the only reasonable candidate. He doesn't go out and attack people personally. He attacks ideas. He was a good lawyer, yada, yada, yada. I don't even think I understood necessarily that Rogan said he's going to vote for RFK Jr., just highlighting some personality strengths of RFK. Ones that I think we all agree with, even the most diehard of Trump supporters. And I don't consider myself a Trump supporter. I think many people would consider me that. I think Trump must win this election. I think people ought to vote for Trump, because if they don't, I'm not telling anybody how to vote. No, but if they don't vote for Trump, what they are basically doing is ratifying the weaponization of the judicial process, weaponizing lawfare, so that you no longer have elections, you have selections. You have a deep state that says, we don't like that candidate, we're going to run him through the ringer. And if you don't vote for Trump as a protest to that, you are effectively voting to sanction that. That is not to say that I think RFK Jr. is a terrible candidate who brings nothing to the campaign trail and who brings nothing potentially to Donald Trump's campaign. Been saying this from the beginning. RFK Jr. is a very reasonable person. He is amenable to changing his views, to learning. Some people might say, look, if you come to too many wrong conclusions too quickly and you have to change your opinion too often, that shows some intellectual problems. That shows that you come to opinions too quickly without having done the requisite research. But if you never change your mind, you are just a dogmatic, stubborn idiot who can't be relied on to admit when you made a mistake or evolve as time evolves. RFK Jr. has evolved on a number of issues. People still think he's bad on Second Amendment, or will be, bad on abortion, or will be, and those are legit criticisms despite the assurances that RFK Jr. gave. One thing that I've always liked about RFK Jr., he is amenable to considering opposing views. He does engage in polite political discourse. I don't think it's going to go all that far, because we're not living in a world where polite political discourse is going to change that many minds or result in the success of the candidate who engages in polite political discourse. But RFK Jr. sits down for long format interviews. He expresses himself quite succinctly, quite eloquently, in a non-judgmental manner. He listens to other people's opinions. That's how he got his mind opened to the vaccine debate in the first place. Despite what he believed, he sat down and listened to the people who were trying to change his mind, and he learned new information and changed his perspective. That doesn't mean that if I could vote, I can't vote and I won't vote. That's not to say that if I could vote, I would vote for RFK Jr. I wouldn't. But that's not to say that the Trump campaign can't learn a little something from RFK. But when Rogan comes out and says, look, he wrote this amazing book, he's a reasonable candidate, he doesn't insult people, he attacks ideas, that's not to say that he's voting for RFK Jr., although he might. But that is a legitimate, sincerely held belief from a man, Rogan, who has also proven himself to be open-minded, listening to opposing views, and changing his mind over the course of time. Do I think Trump might be, better off to adopt some of the RFK tactics? Abso-freaking-lutely. I think he has actually, since the failed attempted assassination plot. I think he's gotten a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more docile, so to speak, listening a little more and not coming off quite as bombastic as he did in 2020 and 2016. I think that type of evolution is good, but I think the Trump campaign could do well to adopt some of the tactics and policies of RFK Jr. So when Rogan comes out and says to his millions of listeners that RFK Jr. is a reasonable candidate, some people could take that as a defensive attack on Trump, and others could say that is room for improvement for Trump. And when you come out and attack Joe Rogan, I'm not going to name names because it doesn't really matter, this type of infighting is not productive. When you come out and attack Joe Rogan and his millions and millions, if not, I don't know, I won't say it's 100 million, but his tens of millions of listeners, when you attack Joe Rogan vitriolically and say you've always been an idiot, oh, you're just a celebrity, an ignorant empty head who goes with the flow. When you do that, you're not really adopting a successful political strategy of swaying or convincing the millions and millions of people who listen to Joe Rogan. You're not doing a good job trying to sway Joe Rogan himself. And some of you might say, well, we don't need to. Fight for life and death, people. And if you're not with us, you're against us. From a purely Machiavellian perspective, and not a sinister, divisive way, but you want political progress. Let's just say you want to use people as means to your political end. If your goal is to convince people, you don't do that by fighting with the people you're trying to convince. Fighting with the people you are trying to convince is a great way to alienate them and make sure that you don't successfully convince them. That's not to say that you can't fight. Fight with people who you cannot convince as a means to convince the people you can. So when I say don't judge someone for expressing a sincerely held political belief, I mean that. When someone comes out and says, I support Kamala Harris, well, that might be a sincerely held political belief based in absolute ignorance. And I would say that 90+% of the people who actively say they are actively supporting Kamala Harris can never be convinced in the first place. They can only learn through the errors of their own life experience. So when the world goes to hell after they voted for Kamala Harris, maybe then they'll learn. But probably not even, because as Mark Twain said, it's easier to fool someone than to convince them they've been fooled. So the world can burn under their vote for Kamala Harris, and they'll still find a way of blaming Trump in 2020. But it is not to say that you shouldn't fight with people, but you shouldn't fight with the people that you are trying to convince. And so from a purely Machiavellian, if we want to go that way, a Kantian, using people for your political ends as a strategy, it's bad. But philosophically, it's also bad. Rogan is not a bad player. Rogan is not an idiot. Rogan and his followers are not the enemy. And discourse among these entities is useful politically, spiritually, psychologically, intellectually. And it doesn't make anybody look good to say, I'll like you and tolerate you when you agree with me, but I will destroy you when you express a sincerely held belief with which I do not agree. That actually is exactly the type of cultist behavior that many have grown tired of and see routinely on the left. Litmus test questions that are actually not litmus tests. You are either for us or against us on abortion. You are either for us or against us on genital mutilation, as I call it, gender affirming care for children. Some of those are actual litmus tests and others are not. But Rogan coming out and saying RFK Jr. is a reasonable candidate who has a good mind, a good head on his shoulders, is open to discussion. When you come out and vitriolically attack a Rogan, you are alienating a Rogan instead of actually in any means way trying to convince him. And you are alienating millions and millions of his listeners who, if they're listening to Rogan, have an open mind. So strategically, not a good thing. Ideologically, not a good thing. And spiritually, it's not a good thing. There are lines in the sand, and then there is room for open debate. And I think a lot of people might have learned the wrong lesson from the treatment of Kyle Rittenhouse, browbeating him into a public apology. That type of strategy will not work on Joe Rogan. And if your goal is to sway millions of people with an open mind who listen to Rogan, this is not the way to do it. And even if that were not your goal and you're not Machiavellian in the manner in which you approach politics, spiritually and ideologically, there is room for discussion on certain issues. People are not evil, empty-headed villains because they disagree with you on certain issues. On others, yeah, I think you could call someone a demon if they believe in post-birth abortions, let's call it that. I know it's something that doesn't exist, right, except for the bill in California that wanted to not allow for investigations into deaths of newborns up to a month later. Or that guy from Virginia, I forget his name now, who literally talked about a baby being born and discuss with the mother what you want to do with this baby. Those are lines in the sand where I would say it's right versus wrong, good versus evil. Saying RFK Jr. has some good traits, some good thoughts, is not one of those lines in the sand. And turning it into an all-out war where you alienate the biggest podcaster on earth, and by definition and necessarily his biggest audience on earth, good, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face, and you are turning into the very monster that you are trying to defeat. So not a good strategy one way or the other. I better get going here because show's going to get started, and it should not get started without me. If you like what I do, make sure you like, share, subscribe, have your notifications turned on. I will be live, daily pretty much. Sunday night, Viva and Barnes Law for the People, the Sunday night law show extravaganza. vivabarneslaw.locals.com if you want to support what I do, and vivafrei.com for merch. But more importantly, exercise, eat healthy, talk to people in real life, have an open mind, don't be too judgmental, and treat others as you would like them to treat you. There you go. I'm out. Peace out, peeps. Booyah.
That's just what they do. That's politics. They do it on the left. They do it on the right. They gaslight you. They manipulate you. They promote narratives. And the only one who's not doing that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
You a fan?
Yeah, I am a fan. Yeah, he's the only one that makes sense to me. He's the only one that he doesn't attack people. He attacks actions and ideas, but he's much more reasonable and intelligent. I mean, the guy was an environmental attorney and cleaned up the East River. I mean, he's a legitimate guy.